It was supposed to be just another ordinary night for me, another shift where I would quietly sweep the polished marble floors of the mansion, dust the expensive furniture that never seemed to gather dust, and make sure every corner looked as pristine as the image my employer demanded. I had grown used to the silence of this house, the kind of silence that presses on your ears and makes you feel like you are walking through a tomb rather than a home. The chandeliers above my head glimmered faintly as I passed under them, carrying my mop and bucket, my mind half drifting into thoughts of my own small life beyond these gilded walls. The mansion was too big, too empty, too perfect, and I often wondered how anyone could truly live here without feeling caged by its sheer weight. That night, the silence was heavier than usual. Every creak of the wooden staircase echoed louder than it should have. Every gust of wind outside sounded like a whisper clawing at the windows. My footsteps tapped softly against the marble, yet even they seemed intrusive. I told myself to hurry, to finish the cleaning before midnight, so I could retreat to the small servant quarters at the back and finally rest. But just as I bent down to polish a corner of the grand hallway, my hands stilled, my breath caught in my throat, and the world around me seemed to fall away. A cry, a sharp, desperate cry. At first, I thought it was my imagination, the kind of trick that loneliness plays on a tired mind. But then it came again louder, raw, and filled with such helplessness that my skin prickled. It was not just a sound. It was a sound that pierced through the air like a blade and sank deep into my chest, awakening a fear I had never known inside this house. My heart began to pound furiously. I froze, staring down the long, dark hallway, listening as the cry echoed, bouncing off the walls of the mansion as though the house itself were wailing. I felt rooted to the spot, torn between rushing toward the sound and running the other way. This was not possible, I told myself again and again. This mansion did not belong to a family filled with children. It belonged to a woman who hated noise, who despised disruption, who built her empire on order and discipline. She never allowed chaos within these walls. So how, in the name of everything, could there be a baby crying inside? I gripped the mop handle so tightly my knuckles went white. My first thought was not of compassion, but of terror. Had I stumbled upon something forbidden? Had some intruder slipped into the mansion? Or worse, was I hearing something not of this world? The cry did not sound normal at first. It carried an otherworldly echo, almost like it was coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. My grandmother used to tell me stories about spirits that haunted abandoned halls, tricking people with the cries of children to lure them into darkness. For one chilling moment, I remembered every single story, and the idea of a ghostly infant crawling through the mansion seized my mind. I shook my head, forcing myself to breathe. No, it had to be real. It had to be human. The cry came again, softer this time, weaker, and somehow more desperate. That weakness struck me harder than the sharpness had. Whatever it was, wherever it was suffering. My feet began to move almost on their own, dragging me down the hallway as my ears followed the sound. The deeper I went, the colder the air grew, as if I were stepping into another world within the mansion. My heart thudded against my ribs with every step. My hands trembled so much that I nearly dropped the mop, and I cursed myself for moving so slowly, but I could not help it. Fear and curiosity twisted together inside me, making my legs heavy. The cries guided me to the east wing, the part of the mansion where few ever went. Its rooms were rarely used, sealed off, filled with dust and memories I was never allowed to touch. The air smelled different there, old and suffocating. As I pushed open the heavy double doors, the sound grew clearer, sharper, yet somehow weaker at the same time, like the child's voice was fading. I followed it into one of the abandoned parlors, the kind of place where portraits of long-dead ancestors stared down at you from walls of gold frames. Their painted eyes seemed to follow me as I entered, accusing me for daring to disturb their eternal slumber. Then, suddenly, I saw it. On the cold marble floor, under the edge of a heavy velvet curtain, lay a small bundle. I stopped breathing. My entire body felt as though it had been slammed into stone. The cries were coming from there, from that small, fragile form that moved slightly with each sob. My hands flew to my mouth, stifling the gasp that escaped me. It was not a ghost. It was not an illusion. It was a baby. A real baby. I felt my knees weaken, nearly giving way beneath me. For a few seconds, I could only stand there, staring at the child, unable to move closer, unable to process what my eyes were telling me. The baby's face was scrunched in distress, its little fists waving weakly, its tiny chest heaving with sobs that sounded far too big for such a small body. Its clothes were crumpled and thin, hardly enough to keep it warm against the cold of the marble. How long had it been lying there? How long had it been crying for someone to come? My pulse hammered in my ears. Fear tangled with pity, confusion tangled with dread. This made no sense. There was no explanation, no rational reason why a baby would be here, abandoned in the middle of a lifeless mansion ruled by a woman who despised weakness. Who had left it here? Why here, of all places? And why on the floor? Like it was nothing more than a discarded piece of cloth. I took a hesitant step forward, then another, each one slower than the last, as though approaching some dangerous creature instead of a helpless child. My heart was screaming at me to run, but something deeper pulled me closer, something I could not name. When I finally reached the child, I knelt down, my hands hovering above its trembling little body, terrified to touch it, terrified not to. Its crying softened as if sensing my presence, but that made it worse somehow, like it trusted me already, as if I had the power to protect it when I had no idea what was happening. For the first time, I realized how loud my own breathing had become. Each inhale sounded harsh, unsteady, and every exhale carried the weight of disbelief. My mind spun through every possibility. Perhaps a servant had hidden their child here, or perhaps someone from the outside had abandoned it, hoping it would be discovered. Or perhaps, in some twisted way, this was a test, set by the CEO herself, a trap to see if we servants could be trusted with secrets. The thought made my stomach churn. I could not move. I could not decide. My body was paralyzed between fear and compassion. My eyes locked on the baby's face, memorizing the way its features twisted with each cry, and for a fleeting second, I felt something strange stir inside me, a pull, a recognition, though I could not place it. I wanted to reach out, to lift it into safety, but another voice inside me screamed to step away, to protect myself, to pretend I never saw it. But how could I? How could anyone turn away from a child abandoned on the floor of a mansion built for riches and power? How could I leave it to suffer in silence when I was the only one who had heard its desperate cry? My hands shook as I reached forward, fingers brushing against the edge of the blanket, the warmth of life radiating through. The baby whimpered softly, its cries fading into a pitiful sound that made my chest tighten painfully. At that moment, I knew nothing in my life would ever be the same again. I couldn't understand whose child this was and why it was abandoned in the middle of this mansion. The moment I bent down to touch the child, my hands began to betray me. They shook uncontrollably, as if every nerve in my body was warning me against what I was about to do. I hovered above the baby for what felt like endless minutes, my chest tight, my throat dry, my mind screaming at me to think before I acted. This was not just any small act of kindness. In this mansion, even the most innocent gesture could turn into a crime. Yet there was the child, fragile and cold, its little fists waving weakly in the air, its whimpers sounding like the last cries of someone too small to fight against the cruelty of the world. I asked myself again and again whether I should pick the child up or leave it where it lay. My duty as a servant told me one thing: never interfere with matters that were not mine. Never step beyond the invisible line that separated my existence from that of the powerful woman who owned this palace. I had survived this long because I obeyed that rule, because I learned to make myself invisible in the presence of wealth and authority. But how could I ignore the fact that this baby was shivering against the cold marble floor? Every sob pierced me deeper, each one pulling at the strings of my heart until I could no longer breathe without guilt pressing on my chest. My fear grew heavier with every second. If the CEO were to walk in at that very moment, what explanation could I possibly give? She was not a woman of patience or sympathy. She was a storm disguised as elegance, and her wrath was legendary among the servants. Would she believe me if I said I simply found the child there? Or would she accuse me of bringing it, of dishonoring her mansion by turning it into a refuge for something so out of place? I could already see the cold fury in her eyes, already hear her voice cutting me down, already feel the weight of her suspicion crushing me. I had been blamed before for smaller mistakes, a broken vase, a misplaced key, and the humiliation still burned in my memory. This, however, was no small mistake. This was a scandal waiting to explode. And yet, despite all that fear, despite my trembling hands and racing thoughts, there was something stronger rising within me. It was not logic, nor was it duty. It was something older, something that went beyond rules and survival. It was compassion, the kind that cannot be silenced even when fear screams louder. The baby's face was so small, so innocent, its eyes squeezed shut as tears streamed down its cheeks. The corners of its mouth trembled with every cry, as though begging for a comfort it had never known. I could not turn away. No matter the danger, no matter the consequences, I could not leave it abandoned like an unwanted shadow. Slowly, carefully, I slid my arms beneath its fragile body. The moment my skin touched its warmth, a shiver raced through me. My hands trembled harder, but I did not pull back. Instead, I gathered the baby close to my chest, lifting it from the cold floor and cradling it against the thin fabric of my uniform. The weight was so slight, almost nothing at all, and yet it felt heavier than anything I had ever carried. It was not just a child I was holding, it was a secret, a mystery, perhaps even a curse that had been left here for me to find. The baby's cries softened the moment I held it. That alone shook me more than anything else, as if it had been waiting all this time for someone, anyone, to reach out and give it a moment of safety. My heart squeezed painfully at the thought. What kind of cruelty would leave such an innocent being alone on the floor of a mansion built for pride and wealth? Who could abandon a child with such disregard, as though it were an object rather than a living soul? Tears stung my eyes, though I tried to blink them back. I had long taught myself never to cry within these walls, for tears were seen as weakness, and weakness had no place in this house of power. But now, holding this trembling life in my arms, I could no longer stop myself. I whispered softly, words that I could not even hear myself, words of comfort, of apology, as though this child could understand that I was sorry for a cruelty that was not mine to commit. Still, the fear remained, wrapping itself tighter around me with every second. I kept imagining footsteps echoing down the hallway, the sound of the CEO's heels striking the marble, her shadow stretching across the walls, her eyes narrowing as they found me with the baby in my arms. My heart nearly stopped just at the thought of it. She would never believe me. She would see only what she wanted to see, and what she wanted was control, not chaos. To her, this child would not be an innocent being but a disruption, a threat to the perfection she built so carefully around herself. And I, the lowly maid, would be the scapegoat for it all. I thought of leaving it back where I had found it, of setting it down again and pretending that none of this had ever happened. But when I glanced at its tiny face, when I saw the way its lashes clung together with tears and the way its lips parted with soft whimpers, I knew I could not do it. To leave it there would be to abandon it to silence once more, and I could not bear the idea that it might fade away unseen, unheard, unloved. No, I had already crossed the line by lifting it. There was no going back now. I shifted the baby gently in my arms, my hands still trembling, my body tense, as if every sound in the mansion could be the one that betrayed me. I told myself that I had to hide it, that I had to find a place where it would be safe until I could figure out what to do next. But where? Every corner of the house belonged to her. Every shadow carried her presence. There was nowhere safe, not truly. And yet, even knowing that, I clung to the baby tighter, my arms tightening instinctively around it, as though my embrace alone could shield it from all the dangers of the world. For the first time in my life, I realized how little my role as a maid meant in that moment. The mansion's rules, the endless hierarchy of power, the fear of punishment, all of it seemed so small compared to the fragile weight in my arms. In that moment, I was not a servant, not a pawn in someone else's game. I was simply a human being holding another human being who needed me. And though my hands trembled and my heart pounded with terror, I could not let go. But I had no idea that by lifting this child, I was about to uncover the darkest secret of the house. The creaking of the front doors startled me so violently that I nearly dropped the baby from my trembling arms. The sound was unmistakable, a deep groan of heavy wood swinging open, echoing across the grand marble hallway. For a moment, I prayed I had imagined it, that perhaps the storm outside had pushed the doors against their hinges. But then, I heard the rhythm of footsteps, sharp, deliberate, and full of authority. My blood ran cold. I knew those footsteps. I had heard them countless times before, each strike of her heels against the polished floor like a verdict delivered without trial. The CEO had returned. She was not expected that night. Her schedule was usually predictable, designed around board meetings, private dinners with people of influence, and late hours locked inside her study. Whenever she traveled, the staff breathed easier, the mansion softened without her presence, and we allowed ourselves tiny moments of comfort. But when she was inside these walls, everything shifted. We spoke in whispers, moved in silence, and carried the weight of invisible chains. She was the kind of woman who could command a room without saying a single word, the kind of woman whose cold glance could unravel you until you felt smaller than dust. I had seen her only a handful of times up close, and even then, my gaze had been fixed on the floor. She was striking, undeniably beautiful in a way that was almost painful to look at. But there was no warmth in her beauty, no softness. Her power radiated from her like an aura that scorched anyone who dared step too close. Her reputation extended far beyond this house. People spoke of her as a woman who built an empire from nothing, a woman who clawed her way to the top of the business world and destroyed anyone who stood in her way. Servants whispered stories of employees fired for the smallest mistakes, of partners ruined for daring to betray her. To the world, she was a symbol of strength and success. To us who worked under her, she was something else entirely, a storm, a shadow, an authority so absolute that even the walls seemed to tremble when she walked. And now, she was home. The baby in my arms whimpered again, a fragile sound that echoed far too loudly in the silence. My heart stopped. It was one thing for me to discover this child hidden in the corner of her mansion, but it was another for her to walk in and hear it for herself. Panic clawed at my chest. I glanced around desperately, as if I might find some miracle hiding place in the bare hallway, but there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The mansion was built like a stage, vast and open, with nowhere to conceal a secret like the one I held. Her footsteps grew louder, sharper, each one cutting into me like a blade. I clutched the child tighter, praying foolishly that if I held it close enough, it might fall silent, that its cries might soften into nothing. But the baby, oblivious to the danger, let out another helpless wail. The sound reverberated through the hall, and I knew then that the CEO had heard it. Her pace quickened. I stood frozen, every instinct screaming at me to flee, but my legs refused to move. The long shadows from the chandelier stretched across the floor, and then, at the far end of the hallway, her figure emerged. She cut an imposing silhouette, tall, poised, wrapped in a coat that seemed as sharp as her presence, her hair pulled back perfectly, her heels striking the marble like a countdown to my doom. Her face was carved in ice, expressionless yet terrifying in its calmness, her eyes scanning the hallway with precision until they landed on me. The air seemed to vanish from the mansion. I had been seen. She moved toward me, her strides purposeful, her presence suffocating. My arms trembled around the baby, my throat closed up, and every excuse I had rehearsed in my mind vanished. I felt like a criminal caught in the act, though my only crime had been compassion. But compassion had no value here. In this mansion, mercy was weakness, and weakness was unforgivable. Her voice, when it came, was low but searing, cutting through the silence. "What is that sound?" I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. My lips parted. My chest rose and fell, but words betrayed me. My eyes dropped to the child instinctively, and that was all the answer she needed. She stopped in her tracks, her gaze sharpening, her brows furrowing. The baby gave another soft cry, and it was as though the sound carried directly into her veins, igniting something dark and furious inside her. She began to walk again, faster now, her heels clattering louder and louder, her anger no longer contained. She was known for her rules that all of us had memorized like prayers. No noise past 9 o'clock, no disruptions in the East Wing, no questions asked when orders were given, and above all, no disobedience. We lived by her laws because to break them was to risk everything. And here I stood, a maid with a baby in my arms, a baby that should not have been here, a baby that shattered every rule with its very existence. Her eyes blazed with fury as she reached me, and I felt the weight of her dominance pressing down on me like a mountain. I shrank beneath her gaze, unable to meet it, staring instead at the polished tips of her heels as they stopped just inches from me. Her voice dropped lower, but the venom within it only grew sharper. "Explain yourself." My lips trembled. My throat was dry. I wanted to tell her I had only found the child abandoned, that I had no idea how it had arrived in her home, that I was as confused as she surely was. But the words refused to leave my mouth, trapped by the terror that gripped me. My silence must have looked like guilt, and I could feel the judgment building in her eyes. The baby squirmed slightly, its tiny hand brushing against my chin, and the innocent gesture shattered me. My fear deepened into despair. How could I possibly defend myself when the evidence of my supposed crime was crying in my arms for her to see? Every second stretched longer, every breath heavier. The mansion seemed to close in around us, the walls tightening until I felt suffocated by the moment. She leaned closer, her eyes narrowing further, the fury in them nearly unbearable. She was about to speak again, I could tell, about to unleash the storm she kept tightly leashed within her. But then it happened. The moment her gaze finally, fully landed on the baby's face, everything changed. Her voice faltered. The anger that had burned so brightly in her eyes flickered, dimmed, and then vanished altogether. Her lips parted slightly. Her chest rose sharply, and for the first time since I had known her, the mask she wore cracked. The icy composure, the unshakable dominance, the unyielding power, all of it drained away as though her very soul had been struck. And the moment her gaze landed on the child in my arms, the color drained from her face. A baby had no place in this mansion of power, wealth, and secrets. This house was built not for love or laughter, not for the tender cries of children, but for silence, control, and fear. Every room here was a monument to ambition. Polished marble floors that reflected only perfection, chandeliers that glittered not with warmth, but with the cold shine of wealth, portraits of ancestors whose eyes reminded us all that legacy mattered more than humanity. The walls themselves seemed to enforce discipline, and within them, I had lived for years, knowing my voice was worth nothing more than the echo of a servant's footsteps. Never in all that time had I seen such a disruption, something so fragile, so innocent, and so completely out of place. The CEO's eyes locked on the baby in my arms, and for the first time in my life, I saw her falter. The woman who could stare down presidents, who could silence entire boardrooms with a single glance, who carried herself like an empress among mortals. She looked at that child as if her world had tilted off its axis. Her lips parted, but no sound came out, her perfectly composed face betraying cracks of disbelief. It was as if she had been confronted by a ghost, something she had long buried and sworn never to face again. The mansion, usually so quiet that one could hear the ticking of a distant clock, erupted into a different kind of silence, a heavy, trembling stillness, where even the walls seemed to lean closer, as though they too were shocked at what had just been revealed. The sound of the baby's soft whimpering filled the space, echoing far louder than it should have, bouncing from the gold-framed mirrors and polished marble until it felt like the whole house was crying along with it. I felt the air grow thick, pressing down on me as though the mansion itself wanted me to vanish with the child before its mistress decided what punishment to deliver. From the corners of the hallways, I sensed the presence of other servants. They were too frightened to step forward, too wise to involve themselves in something that could destroy them, but I could hear their hushed whispers carried faintly through the air. Their fear was palpable, and I knew they were wondering the same thing I was: how had a child appeared here, in the heart of the mansion where only power was meant to exist? Their murmurs were soft, urgent, like the rustling of dry leaves in a storm. Some prayed it was not real, that perhaps it was only the illusion I held, while others speculated in panicked tones that someone's secret had come crawling to the surface. The CEO's head snapped sharply to the side, her eyes narrowing as though she had heard those whispers. Immediately, the mansion fell back into suffocating silence. Even the air seemed afraid to move in her presence. Her focus returned to me, her gaze cutting into my trembling body with a sharpness that made me want to sink into the floor. I opened my mouth, words tumbling over one another, desperate to explain, desperate to beg her not to misunderstand. My voice, however, betrayed me, stammering, breaking, quivering under the weight of her glare. "Ma'am, I found the child here, I swear. I don't know how it came inside. I don't know who left it. I was only—" My explanation trailed off, swallowed by my own fear, for her expression remained unreadable. Her lips curling slightly in disdain, her eyes colder than ice. She took a slow step closer, the sound of her heel striking the marble like a gavel declaring judgment. Her voice, when it came, was low but filled with venom. "Do you take me for a fool?" I shook my head violently, words spilling again. "No, ma'am, never. I wouldn't dare." "Then tell me," she interrupted, her tone rising with each syllable. "How is it possible that a baby is lying in the center of my mansion, in the very hall where no one enters without my permission? How is it possible that you, of all people, are the one holding it?" Her words crashed against me like waves of fire. I could feel the heat of her suspicion burning into my skin. I wanted to drop to my knees, to beg for her mercy, but I knew such weakness would only seal my fate. Still, I could not stop the trembling of my hands. The way my grip on the child tightened as though letting it go would condemn us both. The baby whimpered again, its fragile cry cutting through the tension. The CEO's eyes flickered down to the child's face, then back up to mine. Her jaw clenched, her voice seething with restrained fury. "Did you bring this child here?" she demanded, each word laced with disbelief and disgust. "Are you hiding something from me? Do you think I am blind?" Her accusations twisted like knives. My chest heaved as I struggled to speak, as I tried to hold back tears that threatened to betray me. "No, ma'am," I whispered, my voice cracking. "I swear on my life I don't know where this child came from. I only heard it crying. I couldn't leave it there. I couldn't—" But even as I pleaded, I knew my words meant little. In her world, there was no room for excuses, no room for weakness. To her, appearances were everything, and the sight of a maid cradling a mysterious infant in the middle of her mansion was more than a disruption. It was a violation, a direct threat to her carefully constructed empire of order. Her eyes narrowed further, and for a terrifying moment, I thought she might snatch the baby from my arms and order it cast out into the night. My breath caught, my arms tightening protectively around the child. I would have been powerless to stop her. She was the master, and I was nothing but a servant whose life rested entirely in her hands. And yet, in the very depths of her gaze, past the fury, past the disgust, past the cold suspicion, I caught a flicker of something else. It was faint, almost hidden, but it was there. For a fleeting second, her eyes softened, her expression faltered, and a shadow of recognition crossed her face. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, smothered beneath her mask of power, but I had seen it. She had looked at the baby not only with anger but with something deeper, something far more dangerous. But in her eyes, I saw more than suspicion. I saw recognition. In a single moment, I went from being nothing more than a servant, invisible, obedient, and powerless, to a criminal in her eyes. The shift was terrifyingly fast, as if her gaze had stripped away whatever little dignity I had and painted me as a liar, a deceiver, someone plotting to bring disgrace into her world of perfection. She did not have to say it aloud for me to feel it. Her silence, her glare, the hard set of her jaw told me that she had already passed judgment. Her voice, when it finally broke the heavy air, struck me like a lash. "You dare stand in my house, in my presence, and tell me you know nothing?" she hissed, her eyes like blades piercing straight into me. "Do you think I cannot see through your trembling act? Do you expect me to believe that a child simply appeared here, in the very heart of my mansion, and you, conveniently, were the one to discover it?" I shook my head desperately, words spilling out of me in broken fragments. "No, ma'am, I swear. I don't know. I only found the baby. I didn't." But my stammering only made me sound guiltier, my defense nothing more than the pathetic cries of someone already condemned. Her cold laugh cut through me. "Found it? Is that the story you want me to believe?" She stepped closer, her eyes narrowing further. "Or perhaps this child is yours. Perhaps you thought you could smuggle your filthy secret into my home and hide it under the roof I built with my own blood and sweat." Her words felt like knives slicing into my chest. My eyes widened in horror, and the blood drained from my face. "No, ma'am, no. Please believe me, this is not my child. I could never." The tears I had tried so hard to contain finally spilled down my cheeks, burning hot trails of shame and despair. The baby cried louder, as though sensing the storm around it, its tiny wails echoing sharply off the marble walls. Each cry grew more desperate, filling the hall with a sound so piercing it seemed to mock my helplessness. I rocked it gently, trying to soothe it, but the child only cried harder, as though it, too, feared the wrath of the woman standing before us. The sound was unbearable, yet it made me hold the baby closer, as if my arms were the only shield it had in a world far too cruel. The CEO's face darkened further at the sound. "Silence it," she demanded, her voice sharp as steel. But the baby refused to be silenced, its sobs rising higher, drowning every attempt I made to whisper comfort. I felt my own panic rising, my heart pounding so violently I thought it might burst. The noise was only making her anger worse. Every cry, another nail in the coffin she was building around me. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "Do not insult me with your lies. You have been under this roof long enough to know that I despise deceit more than anything. If this child truly is not yours, then explain to me how it ended up here. Explain why I should not throw you out this very instant for daring to think you could make a fool of me." Her words crushed me, and I broke. Sobs racked my chest, my body shaking with despair as I fell to my knees, still cradling the child desperately. "Please, ma'am, I am not lying to you. I don't know where the baby came from. I swear it on my life. I heard its cries while I was cleaning. I found it lying on the cold floor. I could not leave it there to die. I could not turn away. That is the only truth I have." But truth was not enough in this house. Her eyes, sharp and unrelenting, held me pinned in place. Her lips curled with disdain, as though my words were nothing more than the pathetic whining of a servant caught in her own scheme. She circled me slowly, her heels clicking against the marble in measured rhythm, her presence suffocating, her power overwhelming. Every step she took seemed to hammer home the idea that I was nothing more than dirt beneath her feet, that whatever words I spoke could never outweigh the judgment already formed in her mind. The baby's cries grew shriller, more insistent, and my heart ached with every sound. I wanted to protect it, to shield it not only from the cold of the mansion, but from the fury of the woman whose world it had dared to intrude upon. But how could I protect anything when I could not even protect myself? Finally, she stopped in front of me, her eyes burning with cold fire. "Very well," she said slowly, her voice trembling not with weakness but with suppressed rage. "If you insist on clinging to this pathetic story of yours, then know this: I will uncover the truth myself. I will tear apart every corner of this mansion. I will question every servant. I will drag out every hidden secret. And when I find out what you are hiding, I will not only destroy you, I will erase every trace of you from this place as if you never existed. Her vow struck me harder than any physical blow. I felt the blood drain from my body, my strength leaving me in waves. The reality of my position pressed down on me. I was powerless, defenseless, caught in a storm that I could not escape. The only thing keeping me anchored was the small child in my arms, the soft warmth of its body against mine. Even in the face of her wrath, I could not let it go. Something inside me whispered that there was more to this than either of us yet understood. That the child was not just a mistake or a burden, but something larger, something that could shake even the unshakable walls of this mansion. I dared to lift my gaze to her eyes again, and what I saw there made my breath catch. For just an instant, past all the fury and suspicion, there was something else, a flicker of confusion, of recognition, of something that unsettled even her iron mask. She stared at the baby with an intensity that went beyond anger, her jaw tightening, her eyes narrowing not just in rage but in something far more personal. And then, she asked the one question that pierced straight through me, a question that sent chills racing down my spine and made the baby's cries seem even louder in the suffocating silence that followed. Why does this baby's face look so familiar? There was a hidden pain in her eyes I had never seen before, a crack in the steel armor she wore so flawlessly, a flicker of something so human that it unsettled me more than all her fury combined. For as long as I had served in this mansion, she had been unshakable, a woman carved from marble, untouched by grief, unmoved by sorrow, unbroken by the trials that shattered lesser beings. But as she stared at the child in my arms, her gaze faltered, and in that fleeting hesitation, I glimpsed a shadow of the past, a shadow that belonged not to the ruthless CEO standing before me, but to a mother, a woman who had once known loss so deep it had carved itself into her soul. Her lips pressed together tightly, but I saw the tremor that threatened to break them apart. Her hands, usually still and poised, twitched slightly, as though resisting the urge to reach out. She blinked more than once, as though the baby's tiny face blurred into another face, one she had long buried in the darkest corners of her memory. That was when I realized this was not the first time she had been confronted with the helpless innocence of a child. There was history here, a history so painful that she had built an empire of power around it just to survive. Whispers among the servants had often hinted at her past, though none of us dared speak of it openly. Stories drifted through the corridors like ghosts, stories of a son she had once adored, a boy whose laughter had once echoed in these very halls before being swallowed by silence. Some said he had left after a bitter fight. Others claimed tragedy had taken him too soon. There were darker rumors, too, whispers of betrayal, of choices she had made that drove him away forever. But none of us knew the truth, because she never allowed it to be spoken. The mansion had no photographs of him, no belongings to suggest he had ever lived here, as though he had been erased deliberately, cut out from her life with the precision of a surgeon removing a wound. Yet in that moment, standing before her, I knew without doubt that the sight of this baby had torn open wounds she had sworn to keep sealed. I could almost see her mind racing backward to the days before she had become who she was now. I imagined her holding her child once, long ago, before the world hardened her heart. I could picture her smiling, her eyes softer, her touch gentler, before ambition consumed her, before grief turned her warmth into ice. Her eyes darted away for the briefest of moments, as if she feared I might see too much, but I had already seen enough. She was not only furious at the intrusion of this child, she was haunted by it. The resemblance was undeniable. The curve of the baby's lips, the shape of its tiny nose, the way its eyes, though closed with exhaustion, seemed to carry echoes of a face she had once known it was too much for her to dismiss. She looked at me sharply, as though blaming me for stirring ghosts she had tried to bury. I felt torn in that moment. My instincts screamed at me to lower my gaze, to retreat into silence, to pretend I had seen nothing of her weakness. But another part of me, the part that had held this baby in trembling arms, could not ignore what I had witnessed. There was a connection here, a truth waiting to be uncovered, and though I feared it might destroy us all, I could not stop myself from wondering if this child was tied to the pain she carried. Her jaw clenched, and she straightened her posture, forcing the mask of authority back onto her face. "This means nothing," she muttered coldly, though her voice betrayed the faintest quiver. "Children look alike. There is no connection here." But I knew better. I could see the storm swirling beneath her words, the memories clawing their way to the surface. She wanted to dismiss it, to crush the fragile possibility before it grew into something undeniable. But the past has a way of refusing to stay buried. I remembered stories I had overheard late, at night, whispered in the servant quarters when we thought no one was listening. They spoke of her son's rebellion, of how he had rejected her rigid rules, choosing love and freedom over the empire she had tried to mold him into. Some said he had fallen in love with a woman she did not approve of, that their relationship had been the final fracture between them. Others insisted that he had left to escape her suffocating grip, vowing never to return. Whatever the truth, he had vanished from her life, and she had erased him from the mansion, as if by erasing his presence, she could erase her pain. And now here was a baby. Small, helpless, crying in the arms of her maid, a baby whose features stirred ghosts she had sworn to forget. I swallowed hard, my voice trembling as I dared to speak. "Ma'am, is it possible that this child—" "Silence," she snapped, her voice cutting through the air like a whip. Her eyes burned with fury, not just at me but at the suggestion I had dared to make. "Do not presume to know my past. Do not presume to speak of what you cannot understand." I lowered my head instantly, ashamed, terrified, yet the thought would not leave me. Could it be? Could this child be tied to the son she had lost? The son whose existence she denied but whose absence haunted her even now? The baby stirred again, its small hand curling against the fabric of my uniform, its cries softening into fragile whimpers. I looked down at its innocent face, then back at her, and for the briefest moment, I saw her expression falter again. Her eyes softened, her lips parted, and she looked not like the ruthless CEO but like a mother standing on the edge of a memory too painful to bear. And then, in her eyes, I saw the face of someone long gone, a face identical to this child's. The child's face was speaking a hidden truth no one dared to say aloud. Though small and innocent, though untouched by the world's cruelty, its features carried a weight far beyond its fragile body. As I held the baby close, I saw her, the CEO, staring with an intensity that unsettled me to my very core. She did not blink. She did not move. She only studied the child's face again and again, as if every line, every curve, every faint expression etched into its tiny form was tugging violently at a memory she had fought for years to bury. Her eyes were wide yet unsteady, and in them I saw a storm brewing confusion, colliding with disbelief, grief battling against the armor she had built around her heart. She had faced rivals who wanted to destroy her empire. She had endured scandals that could have ruined her reputation. She had silenced critics and enemies alike with nothing more than her unshakable will. But this baby, this small, helpless child with no voice except its cries, was undoing her in ways no enemy had ever been able to. The resemblance was haunting. Even I, who had never seen her son with my own eyes, could sense it. I had heard whispers from the servants, fragments of gossip carried like fragile secrets in the quiet of the night. They spoke of his eyes, the shape of his jaw, the way his smile had once softened even the coldest corners of this mansion. And as I looked at the baby's face, I could not deny it, there was something there, a familiarity that could not be explained away as chance. She leaned closer, her gaze sharpening, her breath shallow. Her hand twitched as though she wanted to reach out, to touch the child, but she stopped herself, as though afraid that contact would shatter the fragile wall she had built between her past and her present. The child whimpered softly, and that sound alone seemed to slice into her like a knife, dragging her back to memories she could not control. I stood frozen, silently watching her internal battle unfold before me. I saw the flickers of emotions flash across her face: anger, sorrow, denial, longing, all colliding in a storm so raw it terrified me. I've seen her furious before. I had seen her cold and ruthless, but I had never seen her vulnerable. And this vulnerability was not weakness. It was something far more dangerous, because it revealed that the child in my arms was not just an intruder in her mansion, but a mirror held up to her past. Her lips pressed tightly together, as if she were holding back words that threatened to spill out against her will. She looked away for a moment, pacing slowly, her heels striking the marble in uneven rhythm. It was unlike her. She was always composed, always steady, but now her steps faltered, her shoulders stiff, her hands trembling slightly as she fought against herself. I could feel the suspense tightening the air around us. Every second stretched like an eternity, the silence broken only by the faint cries of the baby and the echo of her footsteps. My own heart pounded so loudly I was afraid she could hear it, afraid she might turn her fury back onto me to silence her own turmoil. I wanted to speak, to say something that might ease the tension, but the words died in my throat. I was a servant, a nobody. This was a battlefield I had no right to step onto. Still, I could not stop the thought from creeping into my mind: what if the resemblance was not coincidence? What if this child truly carried her blood, her legacy, her pain? Could it be that fate had forced this truth into the open, no matter how much she had tried to bury it? The possibility was both terrifying and undeniable. Her eyes snapped back to the baby, and she stood completely still. The storm of emotions in her gaze stilled into something sharper, something focused, as though she had finally allowed herself to admit what her heart had known from the first glance. She stepped closer, her shadow falling over me, her eyes locked onto the baby's face. I held my breath, unsure of what she would do. Her lips trembled, and for the first time, I saw her facade begin to crumble completely. She looked not like the powerful CEO who commanded fear, but like a woman standing on the edge of a memory too painful to face. Her voice, when it finally broke through the silence, was not the sharp, commanding tone that shook boardrooms, but a fragile whisper that carried the weight of her entire past. "This child looks exactly like my son." With one sentence, the foundation of the mansion shook. Her voice had not thundered like a storm, nor carried the weight of anger. Instead, it had slipped into the silence like a fragile thread, a whisper that carried more power than any shout could have. "This child looks exactly like my son." The words echoed in my ears long after they were spoken, ringing through the vast marble halls, lodging themselves into my chest like shards of glass. For the first time since I had known her, the unbreakable woman before me seemed broken, her composure splintering under the unbearable weight of recognition. I stood frozen, unable to breathe, unable to think. The baby stirred faintly in my arms, its small fingers curling against my chest, unaware of the storm it had unleashed. My heart pounded so violently I thought it might crack open. I had never heard her speak of her son aloud, never seen her allow his memory to breach the cold fortress she had built around herself. The servants spoke of him in whispers. Of course, but for her to acknowledge him, even in this trembling way, meant the past she had buried so deeply was clawing its way back into the present. Her disbelief was palpable. She staggered a step closer, her hand lifting as if to reach for the child, but stopping midway, suspended in hesitation. Her lips parted again, as though she wanted to deny what she had just admitted, but no words came. Instead, her eyes, usually sharp and cutting, glistened with something I had never dared to imagine I would see in her: sorrow. The weight of grief sat in her gaze, raw and unshielded, and it terrified me more than her fury ever had. I, too, was stunned. The idea that this baby, abandoned on the cold marble floor, could be tied by blood to the most powerful woman I had ever known, seemed impossible, almost absurd. Yet the conviction in her tone, the way her body trembled with the recognition, made me believe that she had seen something undeniable. Still, questions clawed at me. Could this truly be her grandchild? Was this tiny being the echo of the son she had lost, the legacy of a boy whose existence had been erased from the mansion? Or was it a cruel trick of resemblance, a coincidence sent by fate to torment her? The silence pressed down on us both, heavy and suffocating, broken only by the baby's soft whimpers. Finally, she moved. With slow, unsteady steps, she came closer, her hands trembling as she extended them toward me. For a heartbeat, I clutched the child tighter, instinctively protective, terrified of what she might do. She noticed my hesitation, and for the first time, her voice wavered, stripped of authority, stripped of command. "Give him to me," she whispered. "Please." That single word, "please," struck me harder than anything else. She had never asked in such a way, never lowered herself to the level of pleading. Not to anyone. To hear it now, directed at me, left me stunned. My hands shook as I slowly transferred the baby into her arms, my heart thundering with fear of what she might do. The moment she held the child, something inside her broke. Her body stiffened first, as though rejecting the weight, but then her shoulders slumped, her arms curled protectively, and she drew the baby close to her chest. A shuddering breath escaped her lips, one that carried years of restraint, years of denial. She closed her eyes tightly, and when they opened again, there was no longer just fury or suspicion in them. There was longing, there was grief, there was love, fighting its way to the surface after being buried alive for far too long. I watched her, hardly believing my own eyes. This was the woman I had feared every day of my service, the woman whose power was absolute, whose rules were iron, whose coldness had been legendary. And yet, in that moment, she was none of those things. She was simply a mother who had once lost a son and was now holding a child who seemed to carry pieces of him back to her. The collision of power, grief, and love inside her was almost too much to witness. It was like watching a fortress crumble under the weight of its own secrets, stone by stone, until the fragile human heart inside was exposed. Her fingers brushed gently across the baby's cheek, and her lips trembled as though forming words she could not speak. I saw the way her jaw clenched, the way she struggled against the tidal wave of emotions threatening to drown her. She wanted to deny it, to push away the possibility, to protect herself from hope, because hope was far more dangerous than despair. Yet she could not look away from the baby's face, could not stop herself from tracing every resemblance, every familiar line that tied her to the past she had lost. I stood in silence, my chest tight, my breath uneven. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to tell her that it was all right to let herself feel, that no power in the world could shield a heart from its blood. But I remained still, afraid that even a whisper would break the fragile moment unfolding before me. The baby stirred against her, opening its tiny mouth in a weak cry. The sound sent another shiver through her, and I saw her arms tighten instinctively, holding the child closer, as though protecting it from the cold, from the mansion, from the entire world. She pressed her lips to its forehead, the faintest of kisses, and for a moment I thought I saw tears glisten in her eyes. And yet, I also saw the battle raging within her. She was a woman built on strength, on reputation, on fear. Allowing herself to accept this child meant admitting vulnerability, admitting that her carefully controlled world was not as unshakable as she wanted it to be. It meant opening old wounds, exposing herself to pain she had locked away long ago. Her arms embraced the baby, but her eyes remained haunted, torn between denial and acceptance, between the ruthless CEO she had become and the grieving mother she had once been. I knew this realization would change everything. Nothing could remain the same now that the ghost of her past had been resurrected in the form of this child. But whether it would heal her or destroy her, I could not tell. But was this truly real, or just a cruel illusion we both wanted to believe? It was finally my turn to reveal the truth I had hidden, a truth that had been clawing at my chest from the very moment I first heard that haunting cry echoing through the lifeless halls of the mansion. For too long, I had kept silent, paralyzed by fear, bound by the invisible chains that reminded me daily that my place here was not to question, not to speak, not to reveal. Yet standing before her now, the most powerful woman I had ever known, holding in her arms the tiny child that had turned her world upside down, I knew I could not remain silent any longer. My words might destroy me, but keeping them buried would destroy us all. My voice trembled as I began, my eyes fixed on the ground because I did not have the courage to meet her gaze. "Ma'am," I whispered, "I need to tell you exactly what happened. I was cleaning, just as I always do at night. The mansion was silent, colder than usual, when I heard a sound faint at first, but sharp enough to stop me in my tracks. It was a cry, the kind that doesn't belong in this house. I followed it, step by step, until I reached the east wing, and there, on the floor beneath the curtains, I found this child. Her eyes narrowed, her jaw tightening as she listened, every muscle in her body straining against the weight of my words. She said nothing, but her silence was more terrifying than anger. I swallowed hard, my voice cracking. The baby was lying there, alone, shivering against the marble, as though discarded. I don't know how long it had been there. I don't know who placed it there. But ma'am, I swear on everything I have, I had never seen it before that moment. She finally spoke, her voice sharp and trembling with fury. "And yet you did not come to me immediately. You chose to hold this child, to keep it hidden from me until I returned. Why? I want to. Her accusation burned through me, and I fell to my knees, my hands wringing together as though I could squeeze the guilt out of them. Tears welled in my eyes, not just from shame, but from the unbearable fear that no matter what truth I offered, she would never believe me. "Because I was afraid," I confessed, my voice breaking. "I thought if I told you, you would accuse me of bringing it here. I thought you would see it as my shame, my mistake, my crime. I didn't want to be blamed, ma'am. I didn't want to be thrown out into the world with nothing." The baby stirred in her arms, as though responding to my words, and its soft whimper filled the silence. Her arms tightened protectively around it, though her eyes blazed with fury at me. "Do you understand what your silence has done?" she demanded, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and despair. "Do you understand that every second you kept the truth from me, you deepened my suspicion, you made this even worse?" I nodded quickly, sobbing openly now, unable to contain myself. "Yes, ma'am, I know. I know I should have spoken, but my fear consumed me. Still, I beg you to believe me. I am telling you everything now. I swear, I am not hiding anything more." But even as I spoke, another image returned to me, one that had haunted me ever since I first discovered the child. It was a shadow, faint, fleeting, but undeniable. When I had entered the east wing, before I reached the abandoned parlor, I had felt a presence, a figure moving in the darkness. I had glimpsed it just for a second, a tall silhouette retreating into the shadows as I stepped closer. At the time, I had convinced myself it was my imagination, a trick of fear, but the memory had stayed with me, gnawing at me in the quiet of my mind. Now, with the baby in her arms and the weight of her questions pressing down on me, I could no longer ignore it. "There's something else," I whispered, my voice trembling. When I walked into the east wing, I think someone was there. I saw a figure, just for a moment, disappearing down the corridor. I can't say who it was, or if it was even real, but I know I wasn't alone before I found the child. Someone left this baby there, ma'am. It was not me. Her eyes widened slightly, though her face quickly hardened again. Her grip on the baby tightened, her expression a storm of suspicion and fear. She did not want to believe me, or perhaps she did. But the idea that someone else had dared to enter her mansion and leave such a gift, such a curse, was too dangerous to accept. "You should have told me immediately," she repeated coldly, though I could hear the crack beneath her words, the desperation creeping into her tone. "Your silence is unforgivable. You have left me vulnerable, uncertain, and in this house, uncertainty is death." Her anger terrified me, but I forced myself to push past the fear, because there was one truth she needed to hear, whether it destroyed me or not. I raised my head, slowly, meeting her eyes for the first time since the conversation began. They were sharp, cold, glistening with restrained fury, but beneath it, I saw something else. Desperation. She wanted an answer. She needed the truth, even if it tore her apart. My chest heaved, my tears spilling freely as I forced the words out, words I had held back in terror but could no longer suppress. "Ma'am," I whispered, "I know you don't believe me, but I need to say this. From the moment I saw this child, from the moment I held him in my arms, I felt it. And now, seeing the way you look at him, I am certain." Her eyes narrowed dangerously. "Certain of what?" she demanded, her voice trembling between fury and dread. I swallowed hard, my voice shaking, every word like a stone falling from my chest. "This baby is not mine, nor is it a stranger's. Ma'am, I believe this child is a part of your lost bloodline. We needed proof, and the truth could no longer hide. Words and suspicions were not enough anymore, not for her and not for me. She was a woman who built her entire empire on evidence, on facts, on ruthless certainty. Emotions might have shaken her, memories might have stirred her, but unless she had something she could hold, something undeniable to crush all doubt, she would never allow herself to accept the truth. Her heart was already screaming. I could see it in her eyes, the battle between her longing and her disbelief, the fierce war between her heart and her mind. She wanted to believe, but she could not afford to trust without proof. Her voice broke the suffocating silence, sharp yet unsteady. "Show me," she demanded. "There must be something. If what you claim is true, then I will see it with my own eyes." Her arms tightened around the child as though afraid that even in this fragile moment, the world might snatch him away. The power in her voice wavered just slightly, trembling under the weight of fear she could not conceal. I nodded quickly, my heart pounding. "Yes, ma'am. There is something, perhaps many things. Let me show you." My hands trembled as I led her through the long, dimly lit corridor to the room where old possessions were stored, a place rarely entered, a room where dust clung thickly to forgotten memories. The air was heavy, and the smell of old wood and paper hung in the stillness as we stepped inside. I remembered this room well. It was where the traces of her past lingered, though she had locked it away like a wound she never wanted to reopen. My fingers brushed over the edge of a drawer, the wood rough beneath my skin, until I pulled it open. Inside were photographs, yellowed with age, their corners curling, their images faded but still powerful. I handed one to her, my hands shaking as though I held something far more dangerous than paper. She took it, her eyes narrowing as they fell upon the face of a young man, smiling faintly, his features sharp and striking. Her son, the boy who had once lived in this house, the boy whose laughter had once filled these halls before silence replaced it. She stared at the photograph for so long that the air seemed to freeze around us. Then, slowly, she looked down at the baby in her arms. Her eyes flicked between the picture and the child's face, again and again, as though her mind refused to accept what her eyes were already telling her. The resemblance was undeniable. The curve of the chin, the shape of the nose, the line of the jaw, though softened in the innocence of a baby's face, they were the same. The baby shifted slightly, opening its tiny eyes, and even in that fleeting glance, the same gaze stared back at her, a reflection of a bloodline she had once tried to erase. Her lips parted, her breath catching sharply, and for a moment, she swayed as though the truth had struck her physically. Her hand trembled as she held the photograph beside the child's face, and I saw her strength falter, her iron walls crumbling with every passing second. "It cannot be," she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. It was not denial anymore. It was the desperate last defense of someone who already knew the truth, but was terrified to admit it. My own heart raced as I spoke softly. "It is him, ma'am. You see it, don't you? This child carries his face, his blood, his memory. This is not a coincidence." She shook her head weakly, though her eyes never left the child. Her walls were breaking, but still she fought. Still she sought more proof, something irrefutable that even her mind could not twist into doubt. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It cannot only be resemblance. There must be more. There must be something left with him." Her words sent a chill through me. for I remembered then what I had noticed when I first found the baby on the floor. Swallowing hard, I reached into the folds of the blanket, where I had tucked it away for safekeeping. My fingers closed around the small object, and as I pulled it out, the dim light glinted off its surface. A locket. Its golden surface was scratched and worn, but its weight felt heavy with history. I handed it to her carefully, my palms slick with sweat. Her eyes widened the moment they fell upon it, and she snatched it from my hand with a gasp that echoed through the silent room. She turned it over, her fingers trembling, and with a soft click, she opened it. Inside, nestled beneath the glass, was a photograph so small and faded it was barely visible, yet clear enough to reveal the face of her son as a boy, smiling brightly beside her younger self. The sound that escaped her lips was not the sharp command of a CEO, but the broken gasp of a mother confronted by the ghost of her past. Her knees buckled slightly, and she clutched the baby closer, the locket trembling in her hand. Tears filled her eyes, spilling down her cheeks as though the weight of years of denial had finally crashed down upon her. I stood in silence, overwhelmed by the power of the moment. There was no denying it now. The photograph in her hand, the face in her memory, the features in the baby's face, they were one and the same. The truth was no longer hidden. The bloodline she had tried to bury had returned, placed into her arms in the form of a helpless child. Her breaths came in ragged waves, her composure shattered completely. She looked down at the baby, then back at the locket, her lips trembling uncontrollably. Her hands shook so violently that I feared she might drop the locket, but still she clutched it as though it were the only lifeline left to her. And then, in a voice so fragile it seemed impossible that it belonged to her, she whispered the words that sealed the truth forever. Her hands shook as she whispered, "This is my grandchild." Now that the truth was out, a heavier question remained: what next? Proof had been laid bare in front of her eyes. The baby was not a stranger, not a mistake, not an accident that wandered into her home. He was blood. He was the living remnant of her lost son, the echo of a boy whose name had been forbidden in this house for years. There was no denying it anymore. The locket in her hand, the photograph inside, and the resemblance etched into the child's tiny face had shattered every wall of denial she had built around herself. The truth was mercilessly clear. But the truth itself was not the battle. The real war was the choice that now stared her down. She stood in the center of the room, the baby in her arms, her body trembling not with weakness, but with the unbearable weight of decision. Her face was pale, her lips pressed tightly together, her eyes darting between the child and the vast halls of her mansion, as though she could already see how this one fragile being threatened to unravel everything she had built. She was a woman who had risen higher than anyone thought possible, who had clawed her way through betrayal, competition, and loss to create an empire where her word was law. Every inch of marble in this mansion, every glimmering chandelier, every servant bowing in silence, they were not just symbols of wealth, they were monuments to her victory over a cruel world. And now, in her arms, was the single greatest threat to all of it, her grandchild. Her mind was a battlefield, and I could almost hear the war raging inside her. If she accepted the child, she would be admitting to the world that the bloodline she had tried to erase was still alive, that the son she had lost had not truly disappeared, but lived on in ways she could not control. The whispers of society would spread like wildfire: the ruthless CEO, the untouchable woman, harboring a child of scandal. Shareholders would question her judgment. Rivals would use it against her, and enemies who waited for the smallest weakness would finally have their chance to strike. To take in this child meant risking everything she had sacrificed her life to build. And yet, if she rejected him, she would be abandoning not just a child, but her blood, her son's blood. She would be repeating the very cruelty that had once torn her apart, the very wound she had never healed from. To turn away from him would not only condemn the baby, but also condemn her to live the rest of her days, haunted by the memory of that choice. I could not stay silent any longer. My own fear trembled in my chest, but I forced myself to speak, to plead, to be the voice of humanity in a house where pride had always ruled. "Ma'am," I whispered softly, "I know what you are thinking. I know you fear what people will say, what they will take from you if they discover the truth. But please, look at him. He is not just a risk to your reputation. He is your grandchild. He carries your blood, your legacy, your son's memory. You cannot let fear of the world make you abandon him. You cannot let pride steal what little of your family remains." She turned sharply toward me, her eyes blazing, not in fury at my words, but in torment at the truth of them. Her lips parted, and I saw the trembling breath she drew as if she wanted to deny me, to silence me. But the baby stirred in her arms and whimpered softly, pressing its tiny hand against her chest. That small, innocent touch broke her again. I saw her jaw clench, her shoulders tremble, and for a moment, the tears she had fought so hard to restrain welled up in her eyes. "I cannot," she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of her struggle. "You do not understand. My entire life, everything I fought for, it will collapse if I accept him. They will devour me. They will devour him. This world has no mercy for weakness." I stepped forward, my own heart aching, my voice trembling with desperation. "Then show them that love is not weakness. Show them that even in a world without mercy, you will protect what is yours. You have fought battles to keep power, ma'am, but this is the battle for your heart, for your blood. If you let him go, you may save your empire, but you will lose yourself. You will lose the only chance you have left to heal the wound that has haunted you all these years." Her eyes closed tightly, her face twisting with agony. She swayed slightly, her body torn in two directions, her arms holding the baby tighter as though every second brought her closer to both acceptance and rejection. I could almost see the scales inside her mind on one side, the empire she had built, the reputation she had crafted, the power she wielded like a sword. On the other, this child, helpless, innocent, but carrying within him the bloodline she could not deny. The silence stretched unbearably, broken only by the faint cries of the baby and the pounding of my own heart. I could feel her torment pressing against me like a storm, and for the first time, I pitied her, truly pitied her. She was the most powerful woman I had ever known, yet she was powerless in this moment, trapped between the two things she valued most: power and family. Her hands shook, her lips trembled, her chest rose and fell in uneven waves. I saw her glance around the mansion once more, her eyes taking in the symbols of her empire, the chandeliers, the portraits, the marble floors polished to perfection. And then she looked back at the child in her arms, her gaze softening, her tears finally spilling over as though her heart had betrayed her mind. Her voice came out broken, torn between a whisper and a sob, and it was the most human sound I had ever heard from her. Her eyes welled with tears as she whispered, "If I accept this child, everything I built could collapse." The mansion stood still, waiting for her decision. It felt as though the very walls held their breath, as though the glittering chandeliers, the marble floors, and the heavy portraits of stern-faced ancestors were all watching her with judgment. The silence was so deep that I could hear the faint rustle of her coat as she shifted, the uneven rhythm of her breathing, and the tiny whimper of the baby nestled in her arms. Time seemed suspended, caught between the weight of her past and the uncertainty of her future, and I knew that whatever she chose in this moment would not only change her life, but also the life of every soul inside this mansion. Her face was pale, her lips trembling as she looked down at the child. I saw the battle etched into every line of her expression. Power had been her shield, her weapon, her entire identity for decades. To accept this baby meant lowering that shield, opening herself to pain and weakness she had vowed never to feel again. But as her eyes met the child's gaze, as those wide, innocent eyes blinked up at her with a trust so pure it could not be denied, I saw her resolve falter. The baby made no demands, carried no accusations, and bore no past sins. He only looked at her, with the quiet helplessness of someone who had no one else to turn to. Her breath caught, a sound that seemed to echo louder than any voice, and she pressed the baby closer to her chest. For the first time, her arms did not hold him with hesitation, but with something that resembled instinct, the natural embrace of blood recognizing blood. Tears welled in her eyes, slipping down her cheeks as though years of repression, years of buried sorrow, had finally burst free. She closed her eyes tightly, her lips moving soundlessly, perhaps whispering apologies into the child's skin. Apologies meant for both him and the son she had lost. I stood a few feet away, hardly daring to breathe, my own chest aching at the sight before me. I had never imagined I would live to see her cry, never imagined I would see her walls crack so completely. It was both beautiful and terrifying, because though I knew this was love breaking through, I also knew love came with consequences in her world. This child was not just a grandchild, he was a symbol of her past mistakes, of her hidden wounds, of the legacy she had tried so hard to erase. Accepting him meant tearing open every scar, exposing every weakness, and risking everything she had fought to build. Her voice finally broke the silence, fragile but firm. If I keep him, they will all come for me. The board, the press, the vultures waiting for me to stumble. They will smell blood in the water, and they will not stop until everything I have is gone. Her words trembled with fear, but as she spoke them, she looked down at the baby again, and her expression softened into something that was not fear at all, but longing. I stepped closer, my own courage surprising me. "Ma'am," I whispered, "your empire may survive without him, but can your heart? You have already lost your son. Can you truly bear to lose what little of him remains?" She flinched at my words, as if they had pierced her chest, and for a moment, her tears flowed harder. She pressed her lips to the baby's forehead, holding him tighter, as though the very thought of letting him go was unbearable. Her shoulders trembled, her breath uneven, but slowly, almost imperceptibly, her grip shifted. She was no longer holding him as though deciding his fate, but as though she had already chosen to protect him, to claim him, to love him. The air in the mansion seemed to change with that unspoken decision. The suffocating tension lifted slightly, though the weight of uncertainty still lingered. It was fragile, this resolution, fragile as glass, but it was powerful too, because it came not from her empire, not from her reputation, but from her heart. She had finally allowed her humanity to rise above her pride. I felt my own eyes sting with tears as I whispered, "You've chosen." She looked at me then, her gaze red-rimmed and wet, her face stripped of all the layers of power and authority. "I don't know if I have chosen strength or destruction," she admitted softly, "but I cannot turn him away. Not again. Not when I see him and I see—" Her voice broke, and she could not finish the sentence. But I knew what she meant. She saw her son. The baby let out a soft coo, his tiny fingers curling against her blouse, and she smiled faintly, a smile so rare, so unguarded, that I barely recognized her. For a fleeting moment, she looked not like the CEO feared by the world, but like a mother holding her child. It was a moment that filled the grand, cold mansion with a warmth I had never felt within its walls. But even as I watched her soften, I could not shake the weight of what lay ahead. This was not a fairy tale. The world outside those iron gates was ruthless, and the people waiting for her downfall would not hesitate to use this child as a weapon against her. Accepting him meant war, and though she was powerful, even she could not fight battles without consequence. Still, as I looked at her, as I saw her cradling the baby with trembling arms and tear-filled eyes, I knew that no empire, no reputation, no amount of wealth could ever compare to this bond of blood. This child had broken through her walls, not with force, but with innocence, and that innocence had melted the last of her defenses. The mansion was silent again, but it was not the cold silence of before. It was the silence of change, the silence that follows a storm when the air feels heavy with the promise of something new. Yet deep in my heart, a question lingered, one that filled me with both hope and dread. And as I watched her hold the child close, I wondered, was this truly a beginning, or just the calm before another storm? If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Share your thoughts below. What would you do if you were in her place? Your voice matters, and I'd love to read your perspective. Make sure to subscribe so you never miss the next story, filled with secrets, emotions, and shocking revelations. And if you enjoyed this journey, leave a like. It helps this channel bring you more unforgettable tales.